Hello, fellow mathematicians. You are here with Miss Ledbetter, and we are ready to do some math. We are continuing Unit 2, which is all about the absolute value function. So you need to be taking these notes in your interactive notebook on page 10. And be prepared that we will have a quiz tomorrow in class over the video, so make sure that you are taking diligent notes as you go through the video. Our goal for today is to learn how to solve absolute value equations. So picking up with our review of just solving linear equations, now we're going to focus more specifically on the absolute value. So recall when you were in about 5th or 6th grade and you learned the absolute value of a number, and the absolute value is represented by these horizontal bars, or vertical bars, surrounding a specific value or variable. The definition is the distance from 0 on a number line. So let's consider, for example, the absolute value of 5. 5 is 5 units away from 0 on the number line, so therefore the absolute value of 5 is 5. However, you must also consider that the absolute value of a negative 5 is also 5 because negative 5 is still 5 units away from 0. So because we're talking about the distance, we're not talking about whether it is a positive or a negative. We just want to know how far away, how many units. So there's no such thing as having a negative number when you're working on absolute value equations or an absolute value function. So therefore, the absolute value function makes us happy because essentially absolute value takes any number or value and makes it positive. So therefore, for the remainder of Unit 2, absolute value has no negativity. So you cannot be negative when we discuss an absolute value function because everything is positive. And so we're going to be positive, positive, positive. And that makes us happy. We love absolute value function. So let's look just specifically at one basic type of equation. If we just want to find the absolute value of some number x, and let's say that's equal to 3. There are actually two distinct cases that we must consider. It's possible that x could equal exactly 3 because the absolute value of 3 is 3, or in other words, 3 units away from the number line. Or we must also consider that the value of x could be equal to a negative 3 because the negative 3 is still 3 units away on the number line. So therefore, when we are solving these absolute value equations, there are two distinct possible solutions for every absolute value equation. So every time you're doing absolute value equation will result in two different solutions. So let's look at, again, just a simple basic one-step type of equation with the absolute value. So let's say we're taking the absolute value of a negative 3 plus k is equal to positive 10. So again, there are two distinct cases that we must consider. It is possible that our negative 3 plus k could be equal to exactly the value of 10, or we must also consider the possibility that the negative 3 plus k could be equal to a negative 10 because the absolute value of negative 10 is still 10. So therefore, we are going to take each of these equations and solve them just as if they were separate individual equations. So let's focus on the positive 10 side. If we wanted to isolate the variable k, then we would do that by adding 3 on both sides. And a negative 3 plus 3 is going to cancel out to 0. So therefore, we would end up with k is equal to a positive 13. So that is our first solution for this for this absolute value. So then let's consider now on the negative 10 side. Again, we're going to solve exactly the same way. So when I add 3 on both sides of the equal sign, well, when I add 3 to a negative 10, I now result in a negative 7. So therefore, k could possibly be equal to a negative 7. And if you take either of those values as the initial or original value for k, plug them back into the original equation, both of them will result in having an absolute value of 10, and that's how you know that you're guaranteed you got that question correct with both of those solutions. So now let's consider one that's a little bit more complicated, because in this case, in this equation, we don't have just simply the absolute value function, but we also have subtracting 6 outside of the absolute value. So the first thing that we want to do is simplify this equation to make our lives easier and simpler so that we can isolate the absolute value first. So therefore, we're just simply going to add 6 on both sides. So therefore, now we end up with the absolute value of x over 4 is now equal to a positive 8. So again, considering both situations, it is possible that x divided by 4 could be equal to positive 8, or it's also possible that our x divided by 4 could be equal to a negative 8 in this case, because the negative 8 has an absolute value of 8. So then therefore we're going to solve each of these, and because the x is being divided by 4, the opposite of dividing tells me that I'm going to multiply. So I'm going to multiply both sides of my equation by that positive 4. And when I multiply by 4 and then divide by 4, they cancel out to reduce to 1. So that gives me 1x, or just x, is now equal to 8 times 4, which is 32. Or, considering on the negative side, because again, x is being divided by 4, so now multiply both sides by 4 again. 4 divided by 4 is going to cancel to 1, so x is now equal to a negative 32. However, if you take both of these solutions and plug them back into the original problem, both of them will simplify the equation to equal a positive 2, because absolute value of 32 is still 32, whether it is positive or negative, divided by 4 is still 8 minus 6 is 2. So that's how you know you're guaranteed you got that question correct. Now moving into one that's a little bit more complicated, because not only are we adding or subtracting outside of the absolute value, but now we also have multiplication going on again outside of the absolute value. So we first want to simplify the absolute value, isolate the absolute value function first, so that we can then consider both of those two cases. So to do that, we're going to start with subtracting 9. If you remember your order of operations, when we're solving an equation, we work in the reverse order. So we're going to eliminate any adding or subtracting first before the multiplying, dividing. So when we subtract 9, 17 minus 9 leaves me with 8. So now I have 2 times the absolute value of x could be equal to a positive 8. Now because they are multiplying by 2 in the equation, so therefore I'm going to divide both of these sides by 2, leaving me with the absolute value of x is now equal to a positive 4. So now, again, considering both of these cases, it's possible that x could be equal to exactly 4, or it is also possible that we could have a solution where x is equal to a negative 4, because the absolute value of negative 4 is still a positive 4. So again, two distinct solutions, or two distinct values for our solution in our absolute value equation. So now it is your turn. So take a few seconds and write these down. Feel free to give yourself some time where you can work these problems out on your own. If you need to pause the video to allow yourself some time as you are working through that, please keep in mind that as you are going through the video, if you have any questions or thoughts that you were thinking whenever you were going through the video and maybe you needed some clarification on anything specific, please be sure that you are writing those down on your notes to self side in your interactive notebook, so that way when you come to class tomorrow we can discuss any of those questions before you take your quiz. Remember that there is a quiz tomorrow, just a few simple questions to make sure that you watched the video, that you understood the concept of the absolute value. And then we will look more specifically at absolute value with an inequality rather than a simple equation. So hopefully you have taken the time and you are working through these example problems on your own. And I will then be able to give you the answers so you can check to make sure that you were able to solve these equations successfully. Hopefully you've had enough time, and if not, feel free to pause the video before I reveal your answers. For problem number 1, you should have resulted in a solution where v is equal to 2 or a positive 7. So that's your solution for number 1. For problem number 2, be sure that you isolate the absolute value function first and then consider both the positives and the negatives. So therefore, you would end up with a result of b equal to either a positive or a negative 4 in this case. So if you have any questions or anything that you did not understand, please be sure that you write those down. Feel free to watch the video again. If you need any clarifying questions or anything before we take the quiz tomorrow, please be sure to ask. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for watching.